What up, friends? Coming at you live from the future. And today we're fittingly enough reviewing Dua Lipa's latest album, Future Nostalgia. This is Dua Lipa's sophomore album after getting some pretty mainstream success with her previous self-titled release back in 2017. While that album was a decent project, I didn't really think it truly showcased all of Dua Lipa's charms and talents. However, Future Nostalgia is far from a sophomore slump. If anything, she's taken her artistry to completely new heights. A fun combo of many new and old sounds, Future Nostalgia it just has an identity that many pop records lack these days. The album opens up, fittingly enough, with the title track, Future Nostalgia. It has a very driving beat and gritty bass that kind of sets the tone throughout the rest of the record. What a vibe this thing gives off, man. The groove is immaculate, and when the synths come in during the chorus, it's just mesmerizing. I also love the sort of almost spoken word-like verses. They just give off such attitude and charisma. I love the sort of power that they possess. The flow change with the sort of muffled guitar that comes in during the bridge is super catchy, and it really matches the sort of falling keys that the chorus brings and thereafter as well. The lyrics are also pretty witty and flaunting, and as a graphic designer, I never thought I'd hear a John Lautner reference in a song, I'll tell you. Who would have thought we could put architecture in a pop song? With Don't Start Now, the pumping bass-driven rhythm is a classic sound that really does benefit from the more contrasting, modern-sounding piano passages that it's blended with. The rhythm of the guitar also complements these elements nicely as it sort of fills in space in what is otherwise a very isolated sort of chorus. That last chorus, though, holy shit, man. When the strings, the keys, and the bass just all come together in perfect harmony, that's the good shit. She really did do a full 180. Cool is one of the more modern-sounding songs on the album. Dua's classic vocal style from her debut album makes a return here, along with some synth passages that also sound vaguely familiar from that same record. It does add some disco-esque bass lines to the track, though, to kind of give some filling to the otherwise very spacey and isolated beat. I guess it's not really the most interesting song on the record, although it is nice enough, and it does have the proper atmosphere for the record overall, I would say. Now, Physical is a definite highlight. It's almost the perfect embodiment of the 70s and 80s sounds that she took inspiration from. The darker guitar and bass passages add a sort of shady ambiance to the more driving beat and more upbeat tempo that the song possesses otherwise. I also really love the addition of the strings and synths during the chorus and how they isolate her vocals right before it starts. I think it's a really nice touch, and it adds weirdly enough, it's like a sort of breakup to the flow that I think is really interesting. It's definitely one of her best vocal performances on the album as well, I think, combining her more delicate tones with her harsher ones, and I think this is especially apparent on the bridge of the track. The references to futurism, lights, and simulations are all really well done. I love that sort of mental imagery that she's giving us with this. Levitating is also an incredible song. The flow on here is just so smooth and fun. The bass line is funky and suave, and the repetition of the sample in the background adds just such an ethereal vibe. The shimmering synths and guitar that arrive during the chorus are incredible, and I think it was a really smart touch to have the string arrangements match her vocal flow. This track almost feels like she was taking inspiration from similar places that Bruno Mars might have taken with his last album that he released a few years ago. They're similar in vibe, but also very different in execution, I suppose. That bridge is also way too catchy for its own good, man. The spatial references to stars, the Milky Way, moonlight, glitter, all that sort of stuff add to the sort of glitzy charm that the disco era was known for, so I think she did a good job there. This one might actually be my second favorite on the record, honestly. Pretty Please also has a fairly modern sound. A simplistic intro is a nice palate cleanser after the more vibrant outro of the previous track. The song in general has a pretty sexy groove, and I find it interesting how they just keep layering and layering more instruments as the song progresses. It is a fairly simple track that you might not listen to too much outside of the record, but when listening to the album in full, I think it does make more sense in context, and I think it does work after the track that it comes after. I love that cowbell that comes in, and the more electro-influenced synths that come in near the end of the track as well add some variety in the album that it's not necessarily disco or 80s, but it does give some of that modern pop flair to it. The synths, in fact, almost remind me of Caravan Palace a bit. Lyrically, it also fits the slower pace of the song due to how intimate they are as well. Hallucinate has some house influences in its beat, which isn't a bad thing. The flow is fun, albeit a bit weirdly similar to some of DNCE's songs, I might add. And I really do like how some of the harsher synths in the chorus are mixing in with the sort of twinkling samples here and there. There's not really much else to say about this track. It's good, it just doesn't really have more of a presence than that. Now, Love Again is definitely my favorite track on the record. That opening is to die for, and I just love how they take those strings and just subtly weave them throughout the rest of the song. It's brilliant. The groove is driving in a weirdly somber way, and I like how Dua's vocals just get more and more lively as they build up to the chorus. The chorus itself is such a pristine combination of the guitars and vocals and strings as they sort of fade into each verse. It has a sort of pining yet relieved feeling that's just infectious. She really does do a great job in making us feel what she's feeling. The combination of hopefulness and heartbreak in the lyrics just take this song to a whole nother level, like, goddamn indeed. Break My Heart is a pretty sultry and dark track. It's an interesting combination of more upbeat hooks and also more ballad-esque moments as well. That's of course it, before it breaks out into a sort of funky party during the chorus. That bass line is super catchy, and I love the sudden and quick strumming of the guitar that happens here. The chorus is a fairly interesting change of pace from the pre-chorus because the former is more disco, whereas the latter has more of those ballad influences. So it's interesting to go from such a slow yet bombastic bit to a more fun and groovy part of the track. The track also culminates these parts of the songs really nicely during the outro. Now, Good in Bed is probably one of the most divisive tracks on the record. It's very different, but honestly, I love it. The vocals on here really convey a sort of fed-up freedom and swagger. And I also really love the sort of non-chorus, the staggered vocals. They're just really fun, and they fit the attitude of the song perfectly, I think. The playful keys are a definite highlight of the track, sort of driving the flow along with the sort of bouncy bass lines. The jazzy keys that make an appearance during the bridge are also a pretty quirky touch, along with how humorous the banter in the lyrics can be sometimes. The album ends with Boys Will Be Boys, and admittedly, this is probably the only track that I'm not that big of a fan of. I'm not usually keen with ending an album on a piano ballad. I think it's a pretty generic move to do, but I think the biggest sin about this song is just how unfitting it is compared to the rest of the record. I don't even really disagree with the track expressing, its observations about unbalanced gender norms and things like that, but none of the other songs on the record really deals with these topics, and the instrumentation of this song also really isn't prevalent on any other track on the album. It just comes off like she wasn't really sure how to end the record, so she went with the safe bet of putting a piano ballad at the end, which kind of just kills the vibe that the rest of the album built up to, honestly. Overall, though, this is basically an improvement on all fronts for Dua Lipa. She definitely avoided the sophomore slump by getting inspired by some disco and just playing with the sounds until they fit her style. I like how it's not purely copying her influences as well. She does add in enough modern pop touches here and there to keep things interesting, and also to create a sound that's all her own. Some songs could get a tad samey, and the album doesn't really stick the landing that much by the end, but overall, these are just kind of minor quirks that don't really detract too much from the overall experience. I'm feeling a strong 8. I hope she continues to kind of hone this sound in, maybe take a few more influences from different places, maybe some soul influences that might be able to pair up with the bass lines that she's been using and things like that, but just something to keep it even more interesting. But I do think she should hone this down even further, because she's got something good going here. Now, of course, we do have to talk about the album cover on this show, and this album cover, I think, is pretty great. I love the color combination, the stark black background, and the pink of her outfit and the bluish hues of the moon pair really well together. I cannot speak at all. My words are just crumbling out of my mouth. It really does have that sort of disco vibe to it as well. The attitude on her face is just great. I love the just sort of confident pose of her in the car. This whole album cover just fits the vibe of the record perfectly. I love it. And that is what I have to say about Dua Lipa's newest project. Did you guys also really like this one? Did you feel it was an improvement over her previous record? Let me know, and then you can dance until the lights go out. What does that even mean? But until the next one, you can dance until the next one, I suppose. And until then, have a good one.